Hi everyone, welcome to International Lawyer. My name is Eric Lee, and I'm now in Japan. Today we have invited a leading Japanese international lawyer, Professor Miyoshi Masahiro. Dr. Miyoshi was born in Chicago, Japan. He went to Tokyo University for foreign studies and Keele University to study law. Then he continued to study international law at King's College London for his PhD program under the supervision of Professor Francis Ballard. In 1970, Dr. Miyoshi joined the faculty of law at Aichi University here in Nagoya as an assistant professor of international law. He was also a visiting fellow of global research institutions, such as the Swiss Center of Hawaii and Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and International Law in Heidelberg. As a leading expert on law of the sea, Professor Miyoshi has been publishing many articles and books in this field. Especially, he is the author of the famous books with great readership from all of the world, such as Considerations of Equity in the Settlement of Territorial and Boundary Disputes, and the Joint Development of Offshore Oil and Gas in relation to maritime boundary delimitation. Professor Miyoshi served as general editor of the highly prestigious Asian Year of International Law. Okay, hello, so thank you very much for having interviewed with us. I'm very happy and honored to talk with you here today. Right, you're the second general.
Great pleasure and honor.
All right, yeah, great honor for us. And you are the second Japanese scholar coming to international lawyer session. In 2009, we had interviewed with Ambassador Yamada Chute, and unfortunately he passed away this year, and it was really sorrowful news to the international societies of whole Asia. Would you tribute to his death what kind of person Ambassador Yamada Chute was?
About Ambassador Yamada. Frankly, I had no close personal relationship with Ambassador Yamada. All I knew about him was that he was ambassador to India when he was elected to the International Law Commission of the United Nations. Whereas I had a feeling that as the special rapporteur of the IMC on the topic of shared natural resources, global transboundary aquifer, he would have read my publication on joint development of offshore oil and gas for reference. And because at about that time, when the IMC started discussing this particular topic, he came to greet me cordially at one of the meetings, the International Law Study Group of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo. Since then, he and I exchanged seasoned greetings and had occasional chats at the biannual gathering of the Japanese Society of International Law. I keep a fond memory of his elegant diplomat manners.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to ask you some personal questions in the beginning. Would you tell us your early years, so many young generations of international in Asia and the world interested in your some study background and family background? Who are your parents? How about their education?
I will call this my personal triviality.
It's really important to understand.
Actually, although you will say that I may have come from a noble family, no, that I'm not a noble family. My father was a common sailor of a cargo ship based in Shikoku, southwestern island of the country, being mostly away from home, but bringing home news of theirs in interesting places and their peoples. This may possibly has a link, if weak, with my motive for studying global sea issues as an international lawyer in my later years. I recall rowing a small jolly boat by myself and fishing offshore for a couple of hours after school in my junior high school days. Like father, like son. I like seafood very much.
Oh, really?
And sometimes I joke to my students at university in my days, saying I don't mind eating fish at 3 meals for 365 days a year. That's one of my former students, now a professor of international law at Hokkaido.
In order to be a good international maritime lawyer, we have to just eat fish every day.
Every day. This is a student of mine, now a professor of international law at Hokkaido University, once asked me if I was doing research in global sea matters because I like fish. I just laughed, But by the way, my mother was a sort of an education-conscious mom and encouraged me to go to Tokyo instead of staying on the high school in my rural hometown. It's a town of some 13,000 people, something. It's a small town.
Is it nearby Tokyo?
No. It's in Shikoku.
Shikoku, I know. Shikoku is in which part of
the southwestern part.
Southwestern part
of the country. Within the Shikoku, my hometown, called Kawanoe, is on the northern coast, facing Hiroshima, on the other side. Right? And fortunately, one of my uncles on my mother's side lived in Yokohama, near Tokyo, and allowed me to live with him for 5 years until I was in the third year of university. By that time, however, my parents had died and not having the older parents to take care of anymore. So, by the way, I was the fifth child, the only son. I had four sisters, elder sisters. But anyway, I had to succeed my family name. And by that time, my parents had died, and I decided to proceed to a postgraduate school in international law. But the need to work, to live, prevented me from finishing the master's and doctor's courses within the prescribed 5-year period of residence. I stayed at the Keio Gijuku University Graduate School of Law in Tokyo over a total period of 8 years. And during the doctor's course of study, I managed to write a paper, a research paper.
In Keio?
At Keio, yes. The meaning of enforcement action in United Nations practice in Japanese, in English. For which I was fortunately awarded the Adachi Memorial Prize in 1969. The prize awarded each year on the best international law paper of the year in commemoration of the late Adachi Miyoshi, was once the president of the Permanent Court of International Justice.
Right. Okay. After studying law at Keio University, you went to England to study international law and got a PhD.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Much later.
Yeah.
PhD, yeah.
Anyways, any after. But I don't think it was so popular for the newer generation of Japanese to study law in a foreign country. So what brought you to England, and how about their education?
Well, that's right, yes. First, I was very fortunate to be chosen as a member of the research center attached to the Hague Academy of International Law, where I joined a group of, let's say, 18, I remember, 18 people from all over the world to do research and holding discussion sessions.
In King's College?
No, at the Hague Academy.
The Hague Academy.
That was in 1970. Yes. And there I met Professor Sir Francis Burnett. And he was the director of studies for this seminar. And our topic was the interpretation of treaties. we chose that topic, perhaps, because in the previous year, 1969, the Vienna Convention on the Global Treaties was
concluded.
Yes, concluded. Sir Francis was the British delegates to the final session of the Vienna Conference, I think. Yes. So I was there. And there I met Professor Balat. Then 3 years later, I was also fortunate enough to get a scholarship from the British Council. I was one of the, 10 or 15 fortunate ones that we selected as a British scholar, British Council scholars. Then I went to London. Then I had no hesitation to choose King's College London because Sir Francis was there at that particular college in London rather than Cambridge or Oxford. Otherwise, I would have gone to, perhaps, to Cambridge or Oxford. But Sir Francis was there in London. That's why I went to London, the King's College London. But somehow, at the end of my studies at King's College for 2 years, from 1973 to 75, I found that I only saw my supervisor once every 2 months or so. Because he was then a member of the United Nations International Law Commission, an important member of the Commission, and away from London for 10 weeks or so every year, from spring to summer. So I had to write to him in Geneva for various instruction in the meantime. And I was working on equity, especially considerations of equity in international arbitrations, with special reference to territorial and boundary disputes. And when he was in London, Sir Francis was in London, of course I went to his tutorial, but I was, in a sense, all ears at his tutorials. So just a faint hint that the Foreign and the Commonwealth Office Library keeps the files of the proceedings of the British Guiana Venezuela boundary arbitration of 1899 in Paris. Drove me to visit the FCO library, their Houses of Parliament, to read the entire record of the proceedings over a period of months or so. I commuted to the library.
Every day.
Every day, for months.
Yeah, you come back home.
And when I finished the research there, the librarian told me that somehow he knew I was the only person to read the whole proceedings of the arbitration of 1899. But writing the PhD thesis took me many more years after returning home from London. It was delayed by two main factors. One was the teaching and administrative obligation that applied at university. This was a private university, so I had to do some administrative work besides teaching. And also, there were a number of maritime boundary delimitation cases arising, one after another, in the late 1970s, 1980s. These kept me busy, covering those cases and reading the related articles that came out in French.
Actual government cases. Japanese government cases was involved.
No. But the many cases, say, for example, 1977, that was an arbitration between Britain and France over the English Channel. In 1982, or 1977 also, Argentina, Chile, Bengal Channel arbitration was there. Also 1982, Tunisia, Libya, continental Channel, and so on. One after another.
All the proceedings. That's how you
and also many papers, articles came out criticizing or analyzing these cases. So I had to read all these papers. In the years that followed. That kept terribly busy. So this delayed my finishing the London thesis. And then finally I got the PhD in 1989 only.
Congratulations. London King's College is really tough in the first
some just Nobel laureates at King's College.
Actually,
not in the faculty of law.
there is no Nobel Prize. You could be as laureate of Nobel Prize in law if there was. Okay, and Japan has longest tradition of studying international law in Asia, right? Yeah. And there are so many Catholic societies in Japan. And so many people are interested in the activities of Japanese Catholic society in international law. Would you say shortly about their activities? What
All right. Yes.
do they do? What do they do?
Actually, I once wrote some, 20 years ago, I think, I wrote a short article on the history of international law in Japan.
Oh, you?
Yeah, I wrote that.
Oh,
yes,
really?
yes. So what I'm going to say is based on that short paper. The Japanese Society of International Law, originally named the Association of International Law, was created out of a practical necessity in 1897. It was motivated first by the need to examine and research the many legal issues arising in connection with the revision of the old unequal treaties and impending enforcement of new treaties concluded by the new Meiji government. And secondly, by the difficult problems which had arisen in connection with enforcement of the Treaty of Peace with China after the Japan-China war.
In 1895?
That's it, yes. The treaty with Shimonoseki. Their solution required monthly meetings of specialized scholars to discuss the various aspects of the problems. The association gradually developed into a learned society, and in 1902 started the publication of its own periodical, Kokusai Zashi in Japanese, or the Journal of International Law. And later changing its title to Kokusai Gaiko Zashi, that is the Journal of International Law and Diplomacy, in 1912. This journal has since helped to disseminate knowledge of international law in Japan and to contribute to its development in cooperation with the academic circles in Europe and America. In May 1925, the association set up a special committee to assist the League of Nations in its work of codifying international law. Today, the Japanese Society has membership of some 1,000, just roughly 1,000, including graduate students. Somehow a few people in Japan know that it has the longest history among the world's academic societies of international law. Although this is a matter of pride. And secondly, the Japan branch of the International Law Association was established in December 1920 and began the publication of the Japanese Annual of International Law in English in 1958. 6 years after Japan regained independence in 1952, and 2 years after its admission to the United Nations in 1956. A unique yearbook of international law in English, presenting Japanese perspectives in the fields of public and private international law and comparative law to international law as over a period of 50 years. The Japanese Annual changed its title to the Japanese Yearbook of International Law in 2000.
6 years?
Quite recently. While maintaining its original focus, the new yearbook now promotes the further advancement of international law studies around the world by seeking authors from other countries as well and publishing articles that offer a greater variety of perspectives. The ILA Japan branch, with a membership of some 300, meets once a year at the University of Tokyo in the spring, normally in April, at the University of Tokyo, to discuss various international law issues, especially those issues being discussed at its main bodies biennial conferences. In addition to these two main academic circles, societies of international law, there is a third learned society in the same field. That is, the Japanese Association of World Law, established in 1965, in the modern form of a study group, in the modest form of a study group, to pursue studies of perspective of possible world law and world federation. And there was a book published in those days, written by Harvard professor Louis Bisson and the practicing lawyer Glenville Clark, a co-author, these two gentlemen co-authored a book titled World Peace Through World Law. This may have a sort of encouraged to establish this small study group in
What does
Japan.
world law mean? What does world law mean? What is different from what is
World law.
world law and international law?
Well, that's a sort of different.
I'm not asking you about academic differences, but maybe there is some group.
Indeed.
Yeah, right. In politics or right. Transnational world law, international law, although academically same, but
this, can I say, there were some, shall I say, citizens, not scholars, enthusiastic about the idea of establishing world federation. They helped to establish this particular study group.
There is a group politics.
Ideally,
that's right. There is a transnational kind of some world, just transnational terms by rise by the US lawyers, not nowadays, but right, okay.
Right. And it has now developed into a society, a learned society, focusing on basic structural and theoretical issues of international, not world war anymore, in a way. And membership is about 370, and it meets once a year, normally in April. Yeah. There are further learned societies on a smaller scale in the field of international law. That is the European Union Studies Association in Japan, established in 1980. The International Human Rights Law Association, established in 1988. The Japan Association of International Economic Law, established in 1991. The Japan Association of United Nations Studies, etc. Finally, there is a very small study group on the law of the sea, of which I am a member. The Japanese Institute for the Law of the Sea, we call it JALOS for short, with a membership of some 30 only. International lawyers meeting twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, to discuss the law of the sea issues since May 2001, and having published the proceedings of the meetings in 3 volumes today, and the 4th volume in preparation now.
In spite of such a long tradition, with some very some good pride, some people used to criticize the young Japanese lawyers nowadays are not so widely open to the global standard. I mean, just they're rather reluctant to share the ideas with foreign scholars and lawyers through the publication in English. How do you evaluate the contemporary Japanese lawyers' activities of research in international law?
Well, as I am now a rather old member of the international circle here in Japan, let's say, rumor has it that the younger generation of international lawyers of Japan do not seem to be open to sharing ideas with the foreign scholars in English. But frankly, I'm not quite sure how true this is. But in terms of English proficiency, my impression that the younger generations are far better equipped with spoken English, at least, if not written, but spoken English, than they call it in my older generations. Despite their oral proficiency, however, I am not satisfied with the frequency with which they write articles in English, or French or German, for that matter. scholarly the younger generation standards, scholarly standards, are rather high, I think, if compared with their counterparts in the other countries, Asian or Euro-American. I can tell this truthfully from my editorial experience as one of the three general editors on the Asian International Law for about a period of 10 years. And also from my participation in a good number of international conferences, workshops, or seminars on policy matters over the past, say, 30 years. Despite my repeated solicitations for submission to the Asian Guild, the young Japanese international lawyers hesitated to write in English for unknown reasons. The more young scholars are, in fact, writing in English because there are far more journals of international law today than 30 or 40 years ago. Nevertheless, I cannot wipe out the impression that if they truly wanted to go abroad, they could go abroad more frequently to deepen their studies or exchange ideas with the foreign scholars of their same generations. Well, one possible reason for their reluctance, this is my personal sort of biased impression, perhaps, would be their reluctance to look outward. Maybe they are a sort of perfectionism, if I may call that. Was it in a sense a national trait of the Japanese people, shared by older scholars as well? Such is the human nature of the Japanese people that the brighter a scholar is, the more careful he or she is not to make mistakes. That's why they hesitate to write in English. On the other hand, this is more important perhaps, that they can obtain almost any data or any information on the internet nowadays. And this would be another, or main reason why they do not seem to be much interested to go abroad for the information they want to have.
Okay, so let me try to ask you some sensitive problem. Nowadays, many people in Asia are worried that the Abe administration's foreign policy are not so fruitful to peace building in Asia. There are also some legal issues remaining between Japan and Abe, like the so-called conflict during the World War II, and very lately, the participation in collective security of the Japanese self-defense force. Do you think the current administration is going well? How do you think about the foreign power setting of Japan?
Well, this is an important, big question, and I am seriously concerned about the current peace and security situation in this part of the world. I know full well that the Korean and Chinese people have critical views of the current Japanese, and not only the current, but the successive Japanese governments' foreign policy stance. The Japanese government have been occupied more or less by conservative, politicians after the Second World War. Yes, that may be why. But anyway, I personally, this is my personal view, personally suspect that such criticism, if there's any, of the Japanese political or foreign policy stance is based on the Chinese and the Korean people's misunderstanding, or may even have been deliberately created, if I may say so. When the criticism is voiced, nothing is mentioned about, for example, China's contemporary trend of growing military expansion.
Expansion is growing.
What about your people's, Korea's extraordinary, persistent opposition to Japanese politicians paying visits to that Yasukuni shrine. To say nothing of the Senkaku Island or the Takeshima Island, or the so-called comfort women problems. The criticism of the recent Japanese political trend will have its good reason in view of the history of the late 19th to 20th century. I understand that. However, I submit that the criticism is going just a bit too far, while seemingly concealing what I call deliberate intentions of unduly or unnecessarily inducing the Japanese people to kneel down, if I may say so, before the Korean and Chinese peoples. Have a look at this hard fact. I say a hard fact. It was not until 1985 when Prime Minister Nakasone Yasuhiro paid an official visit to Yasukuni Shrine on August the 15th, the date of Japan's defeat in 1945, that China began to criticize such official visits by politicians to this particular shrine. Mr. Nakasone had assumed premiership in 1982, 3 years before, and visited the shrine every year since then. His predecessors, Tanaka Kakue, Ohira Masayoshi, who happened to be a Christian himself, and Suzuki Zenko, all visited the shrine in their official capacity as Prime Minister of Japan. Most importantly, Miki Takeo, their predecessor, who was considered as keeping distant from rightists, was the first Prime Minister of Japan to visit Yasukuni Shrine on August 15th in 1975. And Fukuda Takeo, the father of the recent Prime Minister, Fukuda Yasuo, Fukuda Takeo also paid an official visit to the shrine on August 15th, 1978. Then China did not raise a voice against those visits whatsoever, nor did it criticize the visits by Tanaka, Ohira, or Suzuki. China all of a sudden started criticizing Nagasone's visit in 1985 for unknown reasons to us. If a visit to Yasukuni by Japanese politicians, Prime Minister among them, is anything worthy of criticism at all, why did China not criticize before Nagasone's visit in 1985? And why did Korea not begin to criticize much earlier? This simple question raises a suspicion, I would say, that there may have been something behind or extraneous to genuine national rancor, if you have, against Japan based on their bitter historical experience during the 19th and early 20th century. I wonder how the Chinese and Korean people justify the timing of criticizing Japan as from 1985 and thereafter, and their failure to do so much earlier. Unless and until a satisfactory answer is given to this question, the Japanese people would not be willing to rectify what the Chinese and Korean people call the wrong perception of history. In a word, the Chinese and Korean criticism of the Japanese perception of history looks to the Japanese people simply, I would say, one-sided and unfair, totally ignoring the repeated apologies by the Japanese government. If the Chinese and Korean people say the Japanese apologies are not enough, as they say, it's an easy way of humiliating the opponent. How else and how much more do they say the Japanese must express apologies to the Chinese and to the Koreans? I simply wonder. Yeah. Besides, the issue of reparation or compensation was fully settled, I understand, in the Japanese-Korean Treaty of 1965 on the settlement of claims and economic cooperation, and in the Japanese-Chinese Joint Declaration of 1972, respectively. A text of paragraph 1. If I need it. Those instruments, that is a simplified settlement, agreement, or 72 joint declaration, formal interstate agreements carefully drafted and duly signed by the parties with authenticity. If these are next to be void in their relations, what's the use of concluding international agreements? I wonder. As an international lawyer, I seriously doubt the Korean and Chinese views of the validity of those agreements. If I had more time, I would discuss this question in more detail. But at the same time, may I ask China and Korea if they have ever made formal apologies to someone when they made any trouble for their neighbors in the past? History shows that nations cannot avoid mutually causing trouble, great or small, in some way or another. When trouble is caused to a neighbor, you don't apologize, as indeed Japan has apologized repeatedly. That is the norm of human society. If China and Korea have not apologized in the past, it is simply unfair, I would say. But they are now demanding more apologies from Japan. My impression is that a sense of fairness or balance may be lacking in Chinese and the Korean peoples. There's a positive view.
Right. Yeah, thank you for your chat and very enthusiastic expressing your own idea. Right. So my feeling is that the people in Asia should have more time to discuss this problem. Right, that's right. We need such a content. That's what we'd like to hear from this institutional section. And I think one reason why China began to make a voice to the tribute of the Japanese Prime Minister to the Miyazaki Shrine is that they just started opening their doors to the outside, and they started intervening to this Asian problem. Before then, there were very some hermit of some communist regime. And this is my personal view. And that's right. The 1965. I'd like to ask you some Japanese policy about the maritime questions. Japan is now competing with neighboring countries for maritime territory question. You know very well about as a maritime lawyer. What is fundamental reason for this dispute, and what do you think is the best way to resolve them in the future? Right?
The best way to
territorial
resolve. That is also a very
serious problem.
Right? The different questions to resolve. I know that. But about the territorial disputes, I have this argument. Unfortunately, Japan has three territorial problems with its neighbors. First, the northern territories with Russia, or the former Soviet Union. Secondly, the Takeshima problem with you. And thirdly, the Senkaku Island problem with China. But let me take up the Senkaku and the Takeshima problems now, because the northern territories probably is also a treaty-related dispute, rather historical and so on. It's true that these problems have hindered normal relations between Japan on the one hand and China and Korea respectively on the other hand. If there's an adjacent view that Japan is violating international law in these cases, my first reaction is that such a view is simply unfounded. How had such an allegation come about to begin with? What does it say? I'm sorry, I don't know what it actually says, the allegation says. Any sensible Japanese citizen, even not a lawyer, would be appalled at taking back such an allegation. I personally have done some research in the Takeshima and the Senkaku problems. And recently made a presentation of the Senkaku and the Takeshima problems based on theoretical legal analysis. And not necessarily historical, but legal analysis at a couple of international workshop seminars in Taiwan and China. Actually, in Taiwan in September last year, and in China and Canton this past June. And I'm convinced that the international law is on the Japanese side in both problems. Without going into detail, I cannot discuss these problems with any substance. If I may say so, the Chinese and the Korean authorities both seem to be lacking in the knowledge of the international law on territorial acquisition, or are they putting international law aside because they know its application would lead on to unfavorable consequences to them? I'm wondering. Another complaint, if I may say so, about Chinese and Korean scholars in discussing the Senkaku and the Takeshima problem with Japan is that their papers seem to have comparatively few analyses of legal issues involved therein. Being international lawyers, they are strongly advised to make legal discussions as independent legal scholars, instead of just repeating the government's official statements, especially the Chinese scholars. They simply repeat official government statements.
But the government just followed the scholars' statement allegation. I don't think so. Because everyone is that, you're right. The lawyer should you should advocate your position by law. But I don't understand that in Dr. Takeshima problem in Korean lawyers and Korean people don't think it is a legal problem. So that's why sometimes you find them more. Anyway, so, right, okay.
Not sufficiently, in my way.
Yeah, right. Right. So, government followed us.
Okay. Yeah, right. That's the way I don't have the territorial disputes.
Yeah. So we need so much time to discuss that. But
if I had more time, I was quite ready to discuss.
Right. Yes. I heard some funny and interesting story from one of my senior colleagues. When he met a famous, I don't want to just show this name of Japanese scholar, the very famous, world famous Japanese scholar. He met him, and because nowadays Japanese government is willing to bring the doctor question to the International Court of Justice before the court. So, sir, why don't you just bring the Senkaku problem to the International Court of Justice? He just replied that Senkaku is Japanese territory. We are occupying it. Why should I go to the International Court of Justice? But in this case, it's a very contradictory allegation statement, position of Japan.
That's the official position of the Japanese government.
Yeah, right. In Dr. problem, the Japanese government is willing to bring it to the International Court of Justice. But Senka, in the other side of the coin, we don't want to just go to the International Court of the Senka problem. We are occupying it.
Well, the question is not that way. China would not and would never agree to going to the Hague. They are simply reluctant to go. In every way. You have many, the Chinese government have many problems with the Southeast Asian neighbors, territorial questions.
Yeah, right.
They simply prefer to negotiate with each of the opponents, not a multilateral approach. That's the Chinese way.
Right. Yeah. And one more important answer, very curious question is Japan-US relations. Nowadays, Japan-US relations have been changing very fast, mainly due to the strategic partnership established between China Japan-US relations in the 21st century? And in your personal feeling, who is the US to Japan?
I admit I am a conservative man, perhaps. And I think there's no serious problem between Japan and the United States in our relations. I'd say that now that China's economy is growing at the second only to that of the United States, and it's increasingly assertive in its foreign relations, especially under new leadership of Xi Jinping. Its strategic relations with the United States have come to have strong influence on its relations with its neighbors, including Japan, of course. The United States seems to accept this development as a donné, if I use the French word, as does Japan. However this may be, Japan's relations with the United States have remained unshaken, I would say, based on the security treaty relationship established in 1951, revised in 1960, and maintained thereafter. For one thing, it's the American weakening economy seems to be contributing to gradually reducing the United States deployments overseas in the recent years. And some peace and security analysts in Japan are concerned that the United States presence in this region may be thereby affected. While I share their apprehension to some extent, I would say the lasting good relations between Japan and the United States over the last 60 years have helped to engrave not only the common peace and security concerns, but also common socio-economic and cultural concerns like democratic institutions in the minds of both peoples. It's hard, therefore, to think of any major shift taking place between the two nations' relations, in my understanding. Have it made any major policy shift to reduce its armed capabilities in Okinawa? For example, the United States would not have deployed a good number of Osprey tilt-rotor transport aircraft, that is a hybrid helicopter aircraft, which would be interpreted to improve the capabilities promptly to transport troops where they are needed. Despite the reported noisy movements against their deployment in Okinawa, and some quiet observers here in Japan might concede that North Korea and China are not excluded from the target. This is not my own belief. So some people, perhaps conservatives, have been saying this. Not openly. Not openly. They may concede that the Chinese and the North Koreans are not excluded from the target.
Okay, finally, I'd like to ask you some piece of advice for the younger generation, how to make contribution to the society, to make peace building by their own research practice. Right.
Well, I'd like to repeat what I have said already. That is, the younger generation's scholars should be more, so to say, involved in legal studies or theoretical studies in international law. As an international lawyer, I would advise young international lawyers in East Asia to pursue studies in theoretical issues as well as actual political issues from the point of view of bringing the rule of law to this region. Of course, there is already the rule of law in some countries, including yours and Japan. But in many other Asian countries, I don't think that the rule of law is not established. Politicians tend to make light of the rule of law in favor of political experience. That's understandable.
Yeah.
But it's the role of an international lawyer to advise the government officials with the knowledge of legal issues involved in the political problems with which they are faced, to make the maximum practical use of their knowledge of international law. International lawyers must learn diplomatic history and international politics as well, of course. But this is no easy matter.
No.
It's more easy said than done.
Right, yeah.
But if it is worth doing, that's what it's what's worth doing at all is worth doing. Well,
you're right.
and that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you so much for your sincere, enthusiastic, candid, and frank answer to the hard questions. Some of them very, very sensitive, and so it's somewhat difficult to respond. But I'm really impressed by your answers. Some is satisfied the viewers very much. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for giving me this opportunity to express my views.